Da questa città di frontiera, che non ha mai temuto la guerra, io dichiaro, perché tutti intendano, che l'Italia segue una politica di pace, di vera pace, che non può essere dissociata dalla giustizia. Di quella pace che deve ridare l'equilibrio all'Europa.
Fascism more alive than ever. Its ideologies and practices reaching every corner of the planet and a modern Roman Empire. That would be the world today if Italy had emerged victorious in the war against the Allies. Benito Mussolini's forces would have become the key to the triumph of the Axis, and his country would be one of the largest European powers, dominating much of the Mediterranean coast. The outlook of his regime would also cause a strong social and cultural impact, reshaping the values and beliefs of people around the world. But what would have had to have happened for this to come true? In this new military history video, we will go through the days when Mussolini dreamed of restoring the Mare Nostrum, as the Romans called the Mediterranean, and returning to the most glorious era of his lands. We will present a scenario where the battle favored his great ambitions and brought Italy and fascism to the top. If you want to know what that present would be like, stay with us, because everything is about to change. A century after the rise of fascism in Italy, dozens of people make the characteristic salute of this movement at an event in Rome. The ideology is still alive, but if the wish of its main promoter had been fulfilled, we would not only see scenes like this in the capital of that country, but throughout the world. Benito Mussolini was a leader like few others, who sowed love and hate among Italians, but knew how to accumulate a large number of followers to succeed in taking power. These were difficult times in Europe, and there was still much to recover after the First World War. Social instability and discontent among the people could be felt, all of which would be taken advantage of by fascism, a political movement that represented a powerful response to the problems, based on nationalism, populism, and violence.
Entre 1919 y 1925, Mussolini prometió muchas cosas a su pueblo: estabilidad política, orden público, prosperidad, reformas sociales y un imperio. Italia quiere paz, tranquilidad y trabajo. Yo le daré todo esto, si puedo, con amor y si es preciso, por la fuerza.
Mussolini was born on July 29, 1883 in a small town in southern Italy. His father was a blacksmith and his mother a schoolteacher, and he grew up with his socialist family's stories of nationalism and political heroism. Shy and having difficulty getting along with others, he got into trouble at an early age due to his intransigence and violence towards his classmates. His difficulties fitting in caused him to move to Switzerland as a young man, where he further deepened his ideology. He eventually returned to Italy and established himself as a journalist. When World War I broke out in Europe in 1914, his country remained neutral, but Mussolini wanted him to join the fray, which caused him to clash with the Italian Socialist Party and then be expelled for his advocacy of the conflict. In response to that, he formed his own political movement, which he called the Fasces of Revolutionary Action. In ancient Rome, the word fasces referred to a weapon consisting of a bundle of wooden sticks, sometimes encircling an axe, used by Roman authorities to punish offenders. These came to represent the authority of the state. In the 19th century, Italians began to use the term to designate political groups united by common goals. One that Mussolini in particular pursued was to encourage entry into war, something that finally happened in 1915. The leader was increasingly convinced that society should not be organized based on social class or political affiliation, but around a strong national identity. He believed that only a ruthless and energetic dictator could cleanse Italy and restore it to prominence in Europe and the world, based on its roots. He was not alone in this thought, as after the war ended, many compatriots upset by the Treaty of Versailles joined him in his thinking. They considered that the agreement that divided the territory of the aggressor nations did not respect Italy by granting it very little land. Chaos began to take hold in the streets, and a single figure claimed to be able to reverse this scenario.
En 1919 en Italia reinaba el caos. Estaba al borde de la guerra civil. El desempleo crecía día a día, se convocaba huelga tras huelga, y la clase media italiana comenzó a temer que la bandera roja del comunismo pronto reemplazaría a la enseña nacional.
The man who promised to prevent this fear from becoming a reality was Benito Mussolini, who became known as Il Duce, the Duke in Italian, for the great influence he had over the people. He founded a combat-focused paramilitary movement that aimed to mobilize veterans for war so that they could restore glory to Italy. In doing so, he also hoped to translate the nation's discontent into political success, but the young party suffered a humiliating defeat in the parliamentary elections of 1919. Mussolini won only 2,420 votes to the Socialist Party's 1.8 million, which delighted his enemies in Milan, and they held a fake funeral in his honor. Undeterred, the Deuce began to court other groups opposed to his rival. Industrialists and merchants who feared strikes and work stoppages, rural landowners afraid of losing their property, and members of political parties frightened by the growing popularity of socialism. Mussolini's powerful new allies helped finance the paramilitary wing of his movement, known as the Black Shirts. Although the nascent Italian leader professed to be against oppression and censorship of all kinds, the group soon gained a reputation for its willingness to use violence for political gain. This militia terrorized its enemies across the country. The year 1920 was a bloody one, with fascists marching through cities, beating and even killing union leaders, and taking de facto control of local authority. But the Italian government, which shared the fascists' enmity with the socialists, did little to stem the violence. Thus was the rise of Mussolini, who in 1922 was determined to seize power. We are at the moment when either the arrow is fired or the tightly drawn bowstring breaks, he said during a speech in Naples on October 24th of that year. He said, "Our program is simple. We want to govern Italy." The Deuce told his supporters that if the authorities did not resign, they should march on Rome. 4 days later, they did so, leaving chaos in their wake as Mussolini took control. However, beyond having arrived by force, he gained acceptance from society and even from some political figures.
El político liberal Albertini, que no era ningún fascista, declaraba: Mussolini ha dado al gobierno frescor, juventud y vigor, y se ha ganado la confianza tanto en Italia como fuera de ella. Ha salvado a Italia del peligro del socialismo que ha amargado nuestra vida durante 20 años.
This was the long road Mussolini took to power, which he would have maintained for much longer if Italy managed to strike a blow against the Allies, as we will see in our alternative history. But before we get to that point, let's continue learning about the figure of the Deuce as the precursor of nationalism in Europe, and his ambition to expand this ideology. This objective should not wait long, since in the following years a new and powerful ally in terms of thought would join the scene. We are talking about the Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, who admired the Duce for what he had achieved in Italy, and even copied aspects such as the Roman salute and the black shirts to identify his supporters. The relationship between the two grew and their paths joined to face a new common challenge: World War II. There, the differences between the positions of Italy and Germany began to be seen. Before the war began, Italian officials estimated that their army needed several years to be properly prepared, at least until 1942. However, when they first signed a friendship pact with the Nazis in 1939, it stipulated that neither side should go into conflict before 1943, so there was no problem. It was then that Hitler began to show how little value an agreement was if it got in the way of his ambitions. Far from keeping his word, the war broke out much sooner than expected. When the fighting began, Italy's industrial output was only a fraction of that of Germany, France, and Britain, so the Duce was at a distinct disadvantage for the battle. Despite their status as a great power, the Italians' actual infrastructure and capabilities did not match their public image. Benito Mussolini, however, had another perspective. In his mind, he had an army of 200,000 men, controlled Libya, the Mediterranean islands, and much of East Africa. Plus, Japan had joined his side, so he was in an alliance with two of the great world powers of the day. His eyes were set on conquering a Mediterranean empire that stretched from the Strait of Gibraltar to the Strait of Hormuz. And nothing was going to stop him.
Mussolini dreamt of re-establishing Rome's empire in the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum. Embarking on a series of military adventures to achieve this goal, he dragged an unwilling country into World War II, but lacked the resources and industrial base to achieve his ambitions. Il Duce's forces suffered military humiliation on land and at sea. His campaigns in North Africa and in Albania and Greece had to be rescued from complete disaster by Germany's intervention.
At this point, we would begin to recount a new story. Mussolini's Italy had come a long way to get to that point. While Germany was advancing steadily behind all the wishes of the Führer, fascism did not want to lose ground and planned to take advantage of the conflict to fulfill the objectives that its leader had proposed. For that reason, we are going to review some of the events that took place during the fierce and brutal battle that broke out in the framework of the Second World War. Who were the enemies that the Italian forces faced, and how the development of the conflict would have continued if the results had been different? To do so, we must begin with the day when the Duce decided to take a step forward and challenge two of the countries that made up the Allied front and stood between Mussolini and his great imperial dream.
On the 10th of June, 1940, Benito Mussolini declared war on France and Britain. It brought war to the Mediterranean. This was Mussolini's war. It was one that Hitler, preoccupied with his ambitions in Eastern Europe, had little interest in. Hitler was happy for Mussolini to take the initiative, and Germany became involved only when the ability of the Italian armed forces failed to match Il Duce's ambitions.
It is true that part of the Italian declaration of war was caused by Mussolini's fear. The leader thought that he had missed his chance, and that it would be too late to share the spoils of the German Blitz through the Netherlands and France. That lightning raid by the Nazis not only allowed them to occupy new territories, but was of great symbolic importance, demonstrating the superiority of German power over any rival beyond its preparation. While this was happening and Hitler's ego was growing, Italy seemed to be watching from the outside and without any benefit. That was how the Dutch made the decision to go for his personal objective, taking advantage of the fact that his rivals were weakened and suffering from the siege of the Nazis. Both the French and the British needed to focus on their territory, and everything indicated that it was the right time to attack their colonies in the Mediterranean region. For that reason, it did not matter if they had the intended preparation or not. It was time to act, and so it happened.
As France collapsed, Mussolini rushed his ill-prepared armed forces into war in his determination to seize control of the Mediterranean and turn it into an Italian lake. Mussolini's dream of a new Roman Empire in the Mediterranean aimed at conquering the lands that were under British and French control. Mussolini told Hitler that he wanted Corsica, Malta, Tunisia, parts of Algeria, an Atlantic port on the Moroccan coast, and French Somaliland, as well as replacing the British in Egypt and the Sudan.
This great ambition had to be accompanied by the appropriate power to defeat the enemies in each location. It was a war that would be fought on land, sea, and air. However, because the conflict took place around the Mediterranean Sea, land battles were often determined by what was happening in the ocean. Italy knew the importance of this aspect in achieving its objective, so it embarked on a brutal confrontation against one of its powerful rivals, the British Royal Navy.
On the 9th of July 1940, the Italian battle fleet under Admiral Campioni and the British Mediterranean fleet under Admiral Andrew Cunningham clashed near Cape Spartivento on the southern coast of Sardinia.
Admiral Campioni's Italian fleet was an impressive force, consisting of two fast modern battleships, the Giulio Cesare and the Conte di Cavour. In addition, they were joined by 16 cruisers, whose task was to protect an important convoy of 5 merchant ships carrying supplies to Mussolini's forces in Libya. For its part, Britain had violated the naval codes of the Italian forces and was aware of the attempted maneuver. A Royal Air Force reconnaissance plane reported that the Italians were at sea, so the British Mediterranean fleet departed from Alexandria and sailed to intercept them. True to character, Admiral Cunningham, at the head of this naval force, was determined to lead the enemy into battle. So he headed for the Italian naval base at Taranto, hoping to get between the ships and the installations. Now Mussolini's men had also broken British signal codes and knew that the opposing ships were at sea. The plan was to lure them into range of land-based bombs. Moreover, Campioni had orders to avoid battle until the British fleet was within range of aircraft operating from the port on the Italian mainland.
By daylight, Cunningham's fleet of 3 battleships, surrounded by its protective shield of cruisers and destroyers, were attacked by the Italian Air Force. The fleet included Cunningham's flagship HMS Warspite and the battleships Malaya and Royal Sovereign. His single aircraft carrier, the 20-year-old HMS Eagle, had 17 Swordfish torpedo reconnaissance planes and 3 antiquated Gloucester Gladiator biplanes, which was the fleet's only fighter protection.
As waves of bombers flew over Cunningham's grey warships, the entire British fleet became engulfed in tall black smoke towers. Aircraft of the Italian Regia Aeronautica dropped weapons of up to 100 kilos, but they were not powerful enough to have a critical hit. Both naval forces were still far away, so Britain's ships managed to get another chance and escape the aerial siege. However, Campioni was determined to finish off his enemy and sent a reconnaissance plane to find him. The discovery was the start of the final battle. The Italian fleet hoped that the bombing raids would have reduced Cunningham's force and began to pursue him at full speed, ready for a firestorm with their most powerful weaponry.
By 3 p.m. on a clear blue Mediterranean day, the enemy fleets came in sight of each other. The Italian heavy cruisers turned their 8-inch guns and opened fire at the British cruiser screen at a range of some 13 miles. The British replied with their 6-inch guns, but were outmatched by the Italian cruisers.
Returning to our alternate history, this is the moment when the triumph Benito Mussolini's forces needed to pave the way to victory was achieved. With the British defeated and France burning before the Nazis, the ground was cleared to be paved for the birth of a new Roman Empire that would begin to take shape. But that would not be all. An Italian victory in the Mediterranean theater would translate as a significant delay to the Allied plans to open a second front against Germany from southern Europe. This would allow the Nazis to concentrate more resources and troops in the Eastern Theater against the Soviet Union, potentially altering the course of the battle in the Eastern Zone. The development of the Second World War would change completely with a victory of the Third Reich against Joseph Stalin, but that would not be the only impact. Italy also had important colonies in North Africa, especially in Libya. Italian success against Allied forces would consolidate its control over these regions, complicating the operations of other contenders, including the United States, in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Likewise, the Deuce's control over North Africa could also threaten British supply routes to India, crucial to the war in Asia. Furthermore, a victorious Italy would strengthen the Axis alliance, reinforcing ties with Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. This could considerably increase the pressure on the Allies on other fronts, further complicating the global strategic situation. In such a scenario, international relations would undergo major changes, possibly affecting peace negotiations and the conditions of surrender for the end of the Great War. The prolongation of the conflict in the Mediterranean, and possibly in other theaters of operations, could lengthen the total duration of the conflict. This would not only mean a change in the possible results, but also profound implications in terms of human and material costs for all parties involved. A prolonged war could even affect the morale and production capacity of the belligerent countries, influencing the possibility of continuing the conflict under favorable conditions. In that context, anything could happen. Finally, one aspect that is not minor has to do with the regime of Benito Mussolini. A military victory would undoubtedly strengthen the internal position of the fascist regime in Italy. This would lead to calming internal political tensions and prolong its stay in power. The consolidation of the Duce at the head of the country would have significant effects on Italian society, and the ideology would spread to the rest of the planet, remaining in force to this day.
El lugar de descanso eterno de Benito Mussolini en el pequeño pueblo donde nació se ha convertido en un santuario al padre del fascismo. Atrae a unos 70.000 visitantes al año que depositan flores y velas, una especie de peregrinación impulsada por la nostalgia de lo que consideran una época dorada de ley y orden bajo el antiguo dictador.
Si se revisa bien la historia de Italia, Mussolini hizo muchas cosas buenas por Italia.
The support that Mussolini continues to have among some people is given beyond the fact that that Italian victory against the Allies never happened. However, we can say that an Italian triumph in World War II would have had vast and complex consequences, altering the course of history. From changes in the balance of power in Europe to impacts on international relations and the duration of the conflict, world history would have been remarkably different from what we know today. all roads would have led back to Rome, and the Italians would have held a privileged place among the world powers. However, the Axis did not achieve its objectives, and the present is far from being the dream that Benito Mussolini knew how to pursue together with Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. Now, after having taken a look at what would have happened if Italy had defeated the Allies during World War II, it is time to say goodbye. But first, we would like to know your opinion on this matter. What do you think would be the place in history that the Italian Duce would occupy if his forces managed to win the war? Leave us your answer below. Thank you very much for following us to the end. We look forward to seeing you in our next installment of Military History.